Why did that cargo ship hit the Key Bridge in Baltimore? There's a lot of theories going on out there, and I cannot wait to speak to our next guest. It is Captain Stan DeSonia. And Stan, you have been sailing these waters for 30 years as a cargo ship captain. So let's talk a little bit about this. First of all, give me briefly, 30, 45 seconds of your background in this industry.
Well, good morning, Dan. Thanks for having me on. I started sailing when I was 18 years old and working on small dive charter boats, and then worked my way all up to Master Unlimited. A lot of what I did in the oil field. Currently, the company I work for is based out of the oil field, but we have contracts with the government, running government boats, which is where I'm at the moment. But up in the Northeast, Baltimore area, I ran in and out of there for 4 or 5 years, moving containers. I've been to Seagrit Terminal, been to Dundalk right next to that, running sugar up into Baltimore Inner Harbor, and I did work for a company based out of Baltimore for a little while.
So have you sailed underneath that Key Bridge?
Several times.
Okay, so when you saw the ship hit that bridge on television, what was your first thought?
Well, I woke up Tuesday morning, I was drinking my coffee, and I had the volume turned down, but I could read it and was watching it, and I didn't realize it was they were playing it at a faster pace, but I watched it. I saw the lights go out. I was like, oh, they just lost power. They just went black ship. And then it came back on. I said, oh, they got power back. And then it went out again. And then you saw the black smoke. I said, oh, they're back in full. They're back in hard. And I couldn't see the anchors drop, but I saw pictures later where they did drop the anchors. But to me, I hate to burst everybody's conspiracy theory. There's a plausible, easy explanation, and I think it's already been told.
Well, go ahead. What's the explanation?
What I just said, they lost power. And everybody, you need to understand there's a difference between loss of power and loss of propulsion. Loss of power means we lost our generators, because there's two separate systems. You have propulsion. They got a 55,000 horsepower main engine, 9-cylinder, low-speed diesel engine in that ship. And then they had two separate generators that run the power, which also runs all your controls, or most of your controls.
Well, also when they sent out a mayday on the radio, and they also blared, I guess, some sort of a horn, but the workers on the ship were not on the bridge were not able to hear the horn for whatever reason. So, yeah, when you look at the whole theories that this was done on purpose, some sort of an attack, yes, clearly they've had some technical issues, and I'm going to get into a little bit more of that coming up. But they had some technical issues. That is obvious. Then that's number one. Number two, they did send out a mayday. And number three, they did try to throw down the anchor. And also they blared the horn, trying to warn folks. So I don't believe that other people do believe that maybe it was a terrorist attack. I just don't. But I want to get to the technical problems, because the Daily Mail is reporting that this particular ship suffered severe electrical problems while it was docked in Baltimore in the 2 days before the crash. They're saying that refrigerated boxes were tripping breakers and causing the issue. And what they don't know is, was it fixed when they set sail? So what kind of oversight do these ships have? How does that whole thing work?
So that ship's it's owned by a Singapore company, and I pulled up their flag state, but it's a flag of convenience. But they're still subject to SOLAS Convention, which is the Safety of Life at Sea Convention, which actually started right after the Titanic sank, and then it's grown and grown and grown since then, which goes to the International Maritime Organization that was last ratified in 1974, started in 1943. Anyways, but in that there's a set of community standards it's regulatory by country. Like our CFRs align with or exceed the requirements of the SOLAS Convention. So there's 14 chapters in there that outline, everything: safety of life, firefighting, navigational, which is where this would be. So they had a checklist that they had to do. And all I heard the Coast Guard said that they did routine maintenance on the electrical system. but there's a checklist that they have to go through, a pre-departure checklist. I'm not saying that they didn't pencil whip it, because you hear about that happening quite a bit.
Mm-hmm.
But they still would have had a check to go through on that. And they'll find out, because they're on there pulling the documents, they're pulling all the maintenance records, they're pulling the history on everything, and they'll see it because they've got the alarms. All the alarms are saved. You know, if you heard the briefing last night, when the VDR went down, they could hear the alarms, the audio. They could hear all the alarms in the background, because you don't know what's going on the bridge. You just hear the alarm. You can look at the panel, but you're waiting for the engineer to call you and tell you what's going on, to give you a heads up on all that.
I can only imagine the chaos going on that ship when it loses power, they can't steer, and they realize that they're heading for, you know, that big support beam on the bridge. And it sounds to me like there was no way that they could avoid that. Is that true, that they were rudderless and they're just heading for this support and they can't maneuver?
Yeah. So there's a saying in the industry, the fastest thing in the world is a ship that's almost stopped. That ship was still moving at, you know, 9. I mean, they're lucky they slowed down. I guess it really wouldn't have mattered. The final outcome wouldn't have changed much. If they were moving at 2 miles an hour, they probably still would have taken that thing out. But when it goes, you know, you go black ship, whoever, and it's not the captain's not at the helm, the master's not, and the pilot's not. The pilot's standing there giving rudder commands. The master's standing next to him or on the bridge close by, and he's verifying whatever. You know, when a pilot comes on and I've got one of my mates on the wheel, whatever the pilot says, I acknowledge, or, you know, they go. If I disagree with the pilot says, I tell them, because the master has the ability to override that pilot. That's not what happened here. I don't think any of that happened. I think, but when you go black ship, if I'm giving a guy rudder commands, and I'm saying come right 5 degrees, and he gives it 5 degrees right rudder, and it doesn't go, and he's watching the compass to see, and then he tries to come another 5, and he just keeps pushing the rudder to the right. Well, the rudder's not moving. You know, if it went 5 degrees and it stopped, which is what it looks like, because I saw the aerial and the track line of where they went. To me, what makes sense is the guy pushed the rudder to the right, trying to get back on track. They were just a little bit off the track line, which is not abnormal in that area at all. I mean, it's 1,100-foot span opening.
Yeah.
They got plenty of room. So if he got a little bit to the left of the track line, which he did, and then you see him come back to the right, well, they went black ship. And if you look at the timeline and you look at it on the overlay, you see they were trying to adjust to come back on course. Well, they went black ship. Well, if I'm trying to go right and we go black ship, I'm going to keep coming right.
Yep.
So you would just keep pushing that rudder to the right before you realize, okay, none of this isn't working. Now you've got all these alarms going off, and you're turning around waiting. You're just a helmsman, and it's an Indian crew. So, I mean, he's looking at the master waiting. I mean, it's a caste society over there already. So he's looking at the master, who is basically the god to him on that ship, and nothing's happening. So then when the power comes back on, that's where the rudder's pushed hard right. That's where that rudder's going.
Yeah.
Once the hydraulics come back online or the emergency generator kicks online, the rudder's going hard to wherever he left it.
Stan DeSonia joining us, a cargo ship captain. Stan, so let me ask you, you were talking earlier about the pilot versus the other folks on the ship. Talk to me a little bit about this local, specially trained pilot that was on board at the time. What do? They come on board and navigate the ship through the harbor, and then what do? They jump on a little boat and go back to shore? How does that whole thing work?
Yeah, so typically end up in Baltimore, Norfolk, Baltimore area, Philly. A lot of the tug companies will have their docking pilots, just a way that some of the pilots don't actually do the maneuvering with the tugs. They use the docking pilots from the tugboat company, because those guys, they came up as tugboat operators. They understand how they operate a little better. So I'm not sure if they use the docking tug or not, or docking pilots, or if they just use the Maryland State pilots. But so the two pilots are on board. My understanding, one's a Maryland State pilot, federally licensed and state licensed, and then an apprentice. So there's like a 5-year training program before you're cut loose full share as a pilot, before you can actually go do that on your own. That's a lot of training. I'd say that person probably had multiple hundred trips through that bridge. Even and to be a training pilot on that, they got trips through there. So they'll take them all the way down the bay. There's places down the bay, Chesapeake Bay, because they'll take them all the way out to the ocean. So somewhere down the bay, that pilot's probably going to get swapped out. A small boat will come alongside, and they'll climb down a ladder, get on the boat. They'll swap out pilots. Anyway, it just depends. They've got work rest hours that they have to follow, and trip times that they have to kind of keep with. So somewhere down the bay, they would swap them out, most likely.
Now, Stan, they say that there's thousands of bridges out there that are also vulnerable to this type of an accident because they were built pre-1980 without safeguards. Talk about why these bridges built in the 70s are so vulnerable. And as you know your industry clearly, obviously, far better than I do, should the industry or the states or whoever it is that allocates this money, should they spend the millions of dollars that it'll take, $3 million per bridge, on these upgrades?
Well, yeah, I think if you look at the environment, right now the environmental impact, because they're still trying to, go down and find the bodies of the people that are, fortunately still down there, and they've got hazardous waste leaking into the river right now. So, I mean, if you look at the environmental impact, the loss of life over this, what's the price tag on that? I can't give you a price. I don't think anybody really can. To me, it's not terribly difficult. I mean, to engineer, that's a 1,200-foot wide span. If you were to lose a couple hundred feet on each side and put an underwater jetty system, which would prevent, essentially just piling up a bunch of rocks, 50 to 100 feet out from there, so that boat the ship was drawing 49 feet. You could build that up to 10 foot below the surface, and that ship won't get to it. I mean, they may have caused some damage, but they wouldn't have dropped the whole bridge. So some spaces you don't have that much room, but there's fendering systems that they put up. That thing, it was 150,000 tons. It was displacing 150,000 tons of water moving at 8 knots. That's freaking huge and flying for something that size. I mean, that takes a lot to stop. It can be done.
What's amazing, Stan, as we wrap this up is, we know the bridges are vulnerable, and we know that, boats and ships have problems, technical things happen. Are you surprised this hasn't happened more often? I believe that it has happened before, I think, but is it surprising that this hasn't happened more often?
I don't. Everybody talks about, well, they should have had this and they should have had that. I can tell you, being in the industry, I know what the checks were they had to make, and their double checks and the redundant systems that we have on board all these ships. And it's all there to prevent these things from happening. Most everything's, pilotage waters is, I've heard people say they didn't have enough people up on the bridge, or they did it at night so that it wouldn't. There's as many people on that bridge when you're coming in. It doesn't matter if it's day or night. It's the same amount of people up on that bridge when you're coming in and out of port. I think for this one, I mean, to put tugs out there to assist them through those openings, you're probably going to see that. There'll be some probably government contracts put into place for tugboat operators to have escort boats that just stand by right there. See it happen more often. I mean, we used to touch bridges a lot, but there was embankments made because it was expected you were going to do that. And a lot of that was on tug and barge stuff. But I don't know, with the training that our pilots have and the simulators and the number of trips that they have in and out, but if you can't steer or you don't have power, you're dead in the water, and you're doing whatever the elements want to do with you. You got force and momentum, and wherever the current and the tide takes you, that's where you're going to go.
All right, Stan DeSonia.
It's going to come back to a maintenance issue, I'm sure.
Yeah. All right. Well, thank you, Stan DeSonia, joining us. Cargo ship captain. Fascinating conversation about what happened, what may have happened, and what do we do moving forward after the disaster in Baltimore